Welcome one, welcome all. This is Lions Central Radio coming to you after a Lions loss in Week 1 to the San Diego Chargers. I am Nick Castro, my co-host, Brandon Alisklu, always alongside for the ride. First-time rider on the show this week, Nick Pursel from SideLion Report is joining us. He's going to be with us for at least most of the program, hopefully the whole time. We're going to break down this Chargers loss, guys, front to back, cover to cover, if you would. And we'll get into the Vikings stuff in a little bit, but Brandon, we obviously have a lot to get into in this 33-28 loss in Week 1.
Yeah, that's the type of loss. It's one of those gut punch losses. Obviously, Detroit was up and cruising at 21-3, but the 30 unanswered points is going to turn any game around, and that's exactly what happened. It was. I was there live, as we talked about last week, and it was quite the environment to be in as far as the heat. I think that's one thing that people haven't talked about at all is the fact that, and a buddy of mine noticed that I was with at the game, that all of the Chargers were still standing up on the sideline in the third quarter. You know, they were still somewhat peppy, I guess you could say, and Detroit looked like they were wilted. They were all sitting down on the bench. They all kind of had that, we're a little worn out look, and it made sense because I have never felt heat and humidity that high in my life. It was intense out there. So I do wonder if that had anything to do with it, but that's just one takeaway, and I think it's probably one that we're not going to be able to get too much information on. Nick Pursel, I guess, what would be your biggest takeaway from this game?
My biggest takeaway was really just how poorly the defense looked just as a whole. I mean, a lot of people were really hard on Joe Lombardi and really kind of took out him and were really questioning his play calling and everything. But, I mean, Terrell Austin did just as bad of a job. We were playing prevent defense with our linebackers deep in the middle of the field, and they were too slow to react to screen passes all game. They were able to tear us up with play action passes whenever we did react to their run game, and it was just a game of cat and mouse that we very much lost.
Yeah, well, and one of those names on defense that stood out to me immediately was, and we'll get into our most disappointing here in a bit, but Stephen Tulloch, I think the stat was they targeted him 9 times and there was 9 completions his way. The linebacking core, is, especially without DeAndre Levy on the field, it was overmatched. I think Tulloch was the center of that. But Brandon, for me, the linebacking core was easily the worst part of this defense in a really poor defensive effort overall.
Well, it's actually sad because it overshadows that the defensive line played pretty well as a unit, and I'm going to get into one particular player later. But another guy that, yes, the linebackers were super slow to react. The first flare pass to Melvin Gordon, you could see Tulloch, and I don't know if he's not registering what's happening or if it actually is just a foot speed thing. And, yeah, as Nick just pointed out, he was 7 yards deep. He was off the line of scrimmage. So that he couldn't get there in time. And when they did try to get there, too many times there were so many missed tackles in this game. I believe the number was 12 off the top of my head. Yeah, 12 missed tackles, of course, according to Pro Football Focus, and the tape seemed to back that up. They seemed to be everywhere. 3 by your buddy Tulloch, and probably the guy that I'm going to harp on a little bit later, James Ahedebo. He struggled just as badly.
Yeah, he pretty much lost the game for us on that last play where the 3rd and 20 play where they had I don't know if you saw my conversation with James Light on Twitter, but they used 2 deep cone coverage, and they made the farthest guy in the field try and cover, I think it was Keenan Allen in the flat, and he misses the tackle, and they've got 20 yards of just open ground in front of us. Of course they're going to get a first down. It was a real questionable play call, and it's a tackle he needs to make. He had an open field tackle and had a perfect angle on it, and he just missed the tackle. It was just poor execution all around.
Yeah, I thought Glover Quinn looked pretty good in this game. He obviously had the interception touchdown, but just overall I thought he made up for some poor play from James Ahedebo, and not steal anything from Brandon there. Again, we'll get into most disappointing. But if we can really get into the offense, because obviously it looked so good to start the game. They jump out 21-3, and the Lions are really firing on all cylinders. Everyone saw the Amir Abdullah, the highlight, the GIF, the Vine, however you saw it on Twitter, you saw it in the game, everything. But this offense really just fell apart later in the game, and I don't know if it's because of the play calling, if it's because of Matthew Stafford. I don't know what the consensus is on what the biggest issue is here, but overall, the offense just took they took a real tumble in the second half. Nick, I'll go to you first on this, and we'll get into the Lombardi, Stafford, who's more to blame, whatever. But just what did you take away from this offense in the second half? Why did it go so stagnant?
So a big thing that I kind of noticed was really how poorly they were picking up the Chargers blitz packages. They had 2 huge plays off of fake double A gap blitzes where they've dropped their linebackers back, and we had 3 guys blocking nobody in the middle of the field, and then Stafford literally has to get the ball out in under a second, otherwise he's getting clocked, and that's what happened on the Melvin Ingram sack or QB hit to interception that really hurt us. And then really just couldn't get anything together. We couldn't sustain drives. Most of our drives were based off of big plays. There weren't a lot of chunk yardages. Kind of we were just methodically driving down the field. Then there was the other interception where it looked like Stafford and Golden Tate had their miscommunication. The refs missed a holding call in the middle, and there's just a lot of bad things that happened. A bunch of people were talking about how the Lions had such a size advantage, and we didn't see a single jump ball opportunity. I mean, their tallest corner is 5'9". Why aren't we throwing at least one ball up and trying to get Calvin or Ebron or even Pettigrew over the middle of the field or in the end zone or something with a jump ball? I mean, we have the size advantage. That's something we failed to take advantage of. And I think Lombardi did better than people are giving him credit for. I think the noise really hurt the communication of the offensive line, and the fact that the Lions got so beaten by double A gap blitzes last year, I think they were expecting teams to kind of come at them with that. So when the Chargers showed their bluff looks at that, Stafford was kind of thinking, all right, well, they're going to try and get me where they got me last year. And then they back off, and it's just a whole new problem coming in. And it's like where I was saying where the whole game of cat and mouse was, that we just lost that game.
Well, and I think it was, and I'm trying to find the post now, I want to say it was Justin Rogers of MLive who kind of broke down one of those particular plays that you're talking about where they had seen it on tape, the play where Cornelius Lucas blocked down, and was it Melvin Ingram, I think, came in, just completely screamed off the edge, no one touched him, and that resulted in that first interception. As you were talking about how teams were able to expose them through the A gaps last year, they also had prepared. They had seen it on tape that's what San Diego did. That they would generally, with this personnel out there and lined up in this manner, they were going to bring guys to the A gap. So Stafford actually switched to protection to bring Cornelius Lucas down. So it's one of those things that when you see it live, it looks a lot worse for Cornelius Lucas. I mean, that's what my original interpretation was, and it's hard to know these things until you know them. But that obviously that hurt them, and that kind of went towards the one thing that I was really kind of upset, at least with the coaching staff, was the lack of adjustments. It's something that every Michigan fan will probably tell you all about over the past few years. But it's the same thing here, where there was a play late where Slay is actually playing. He's playing close to Keenan Allen Keenan Allen, I think it was the 3-yard cross, but there was no jam. There was no attempt to get physical with him. What you're trying to do is not working. You're going to have trouble mirroring Keenan Allen with anybody. It's not that Rasheed Mathis is terrible now. It's just that you have to put everybody in the best position to succeed. And I don't think they were doing that. They weren't trying to, in the same way that San Diego neutralized the defensive line by getting rid of the ball. And I think, again, it was Rodgers that put this out there, but it was Phillip Rivers' delivery time was 1.77 seconds, or at least time from snap to throw average in the second half. And I just would have liked to see more of those type of things. And as Nick brought up, one back shoulder throw to Calvin, just one. Give it a shot, let him try something, and we just didn't see any of that. So that lack of creativity, as well as just the Heat might have had a problem to go with, and a lot of too many missed blocks. That was the big problem.
And I mean, just to really hammer home on the Calvin and perhaps the back shoulder or what have you, but to have 2 catches on only 4 targets in this game, folks, 39 yards. I'm sure you guys know the stats, but the talk and what Stafford's been saying in interviews since the game is we took what the defense was giving us, that's what we're going to do, and they weren't giving us Calvin, they were double teaming him. But this isn't the first time we've seen Calvin double, triple covered, however you want to slice it, and yet they say they're just taking what the defense is giving them. It feels like their offense. We've gotten into it all off season about how they're going to be more conservative. They're going to be smarter with the ball. They're trying to avoid turnovers, but it can't be at the sake of neutralizing your own best receiver in the passing game. Golden Tate only ends up with 4 catches in this one as well. He at least had 8 targets, but Calvin Johnson only getting 4 targets. He's going to have double coverage again next week against Minnesota, and I guarantee you this team's going to target him at least double what they did in this game. So giving what the defense gives you, I understand the premise of it, but it can't come at the sake of finding ways to get the ball to your best receiver.
Right, and that has to do with those adjustments. They weren't finding ways to get in the ball. Give him a bubble screen. That's Golden Tate had 2 of those, and he picked up 7 yards a pop, and that's all we saw of those. I understand if you're having trouble picking up the blitzes, you're getting Stafford enough time, and that was one of the other big issues. I think that this is a game of missed opportunities. Stafford played reasonably well in some instances, especially when you factor in that obviously he was under a good amount of pressure, but there were a few, the bad read with Tate or the miscommunication, whatever it may be on that second interception, it looked like Tate had room to turn that up. So it looked like the right read from him, but there was the miss of Lance Moore in the red zone. There was also when Stafford stepped up in the pocket, and this is right before the interception, the diving interception, he stepped up and he let it go for Tate, and it's just another yard on that ball. And it looks like you have another touchdown like Tate had in the 3rd preseason game. So there were some things there. Like I said, overall good game from a lot of these guys, but too many missed opportunities against a team that's too good. And the defense, I don't really know. Too many missed tackles, and that to me was the key there.
And Nick, if you're looking at actual positives from this game, who was to you the most valuable player for the Lions? Who impressed you the most?
Well, this is kind of a double-sided question. I mean, on offense, Amir Abdul was everything. He looked fantastic. He was patient. He took what the defense gave him, but still creates out of context of the offense. I mean, he takes pressure off the offensive line. They can miss a block and still get a big play. But then I look at Tyron Walker, and I mean, you just mentioned the stat to where they got the ball out on an average of, 1.8 seconds? I mean, Tyron Walker had 7 QB pressures against that. I mean, he was all over the place. He was making those guards look terrible. And he was a force in the middle. I mean, he looked very, very solid. And I think a lot of people have been discounting his performance and everything, but he needs to get some recognition because he had a great game and he did a really good job filling in for our defensive line.
On our rundown that we put together before the show, Nick, Brandon and I, we list for each other who our MVP, our most disappointing is, just so we don't come up with the same guys. And I went with Abdullah, and he went with Tyron Walker. So you've covered the territory that we wanted to go over with the MVPs. Brandon, I'll toss this one to you. I already went over my most disappointing and Stephen Tulloch for a myriad of reasons, but what was your guy here?
Well, it was in fact James ahead of him. To go back to Tyron Walker real quick, I mean, I think we can call sheriff a verb now. I mean, he sheriffed DJ Fluker on one particular play. It was just, It was impressive to see him just put him on skates and put him right back in the quarterback. His power has been, I know I'd heard about his versatility, and but a lot of things was, well, he's a real penetrator, and it seems he's really taken to the bull rushing penetration that Detroit's asking him, so that's great to see. And like I said, the defensive line I thought played pretty well. Jason Jones even was getting after the passer, and he had a monster tackle for a loss where the defense called the slant the right position or the right time, and he was in a great position to crush the running back and did so. But moving on to James Ahedebo, it was a lot of what we saw in Dallas last year as far as there were the missed tackles, 3 of them. I mean, the one where Ladarius Green is running a crossing route. And he just – I don't know what it was. It was almost like a flying horizontal chest bump, how he just kind of knocked into Green, but no effort to wrap him up. Green just kept going, picked up more yards. And as Nick already broke down, when he was left in the dust, along with Glover Quinn, who while – Glover started out hot and had some nice tackles and obviously the pick 6. He kind of fell off a little in the second half too, so it was a real team effort, I think, on that front.
And Nick, for you, who was most disappointing in this one?
Again, this is a hard question because there's a lot of people who disappointed me.
Oh, no doubt.
I would have to go with Pollock though, because you already mentioned he had 9 targets and 9 receptions on him, but that doesn't count the. I mean, there had to have been 5 to 6 plays where he bit on a play action fake or he bit on misdirection or something like that, and they put the ball right where he was supposed to be in coverage. They'd throw it right over the top, and our corners would be playing inside leverage, just trying to put the ball right where Tulloch's supposed to be, and then he's not there. So he wasn't helping anybody out. He was slow against screen passes, which was huge for us because we're coming from having Levy, who's probably the best screen defender in the NFL. And when you don't have that asset, our defense crumbles because we play so much prevent style deep linebackers that if your linebacker doesn't have great instincts and good athletic ability, he's going to struggle. And I really think that happened.
On the offensive side of the ball, one guy who we'll kind of get into what you thought of his performance was Eric Ebron. Opened with the drop on the first offensive series of the game, rebounded with a touchdown next time out, and then you didn't hear from him until the last drive of the game. He had 3 more catches, ends up with the most receiving yards on the team, as well as him and Amir Abdullah both had 4 catches, so it was a tie for the most catches on the team. But Brandon, obviously, Ebron's someone we've talked about a lot on the show. We're going to continue to talk about a lot during the entirety of the season. Really scary to see him open with that drop, and I've been over it. It's going to happen. He drops passes, but recovers nicely. It was an open pass for the touchdown, nice there, and on that last drive, 3 nice catches as well. What did you think of his performance?
From what we saw of him, and to be fair, I only got to do one flyby tape watch today, and Game Pass it was acting like Game Pass for anybody who's ever used it. So I didn't get to do as much in depth, at least blocking wise and whatnot, on him. But he caught some low passes, and he held on some tough balls. That drop was bad, and I got that pit in my stomach grew quite a bit at that moment. But he recovered well. It's kind of hard to really say too much about any of the receiving options in general, just because there weren't. And there's 47 offensive plays for Detroit. I think 79 for San Diego. So you just didn't see enough to really get a feel for darn near anybody, except for the plays where they missed blocks or they just didn't pick up the blitz. So I thought he looked pretty well. And to at least talk about Abdullah just a touch here, I think he really showed why they drafted him, was that when you put him in space, he's going to be a problem. So it was nice to see him kind of come up on that. But as far as these 2 young options, Abdullah was definitely the better one. But it was nice to see Ebron play well. Nick, did you see anything out there that gives you any, any other insight into his performance?
Well, the drop he had is kind of a typical drop for him. A lot of his drops really come when Stafford kind of rips one because they just kind of bounced off his hands, and that happened a number of times last season. But the catches he made in the last drive were really nice. He had the one where he protected the ball as he went down to the ground. A really well-executed play by both him and Stafford. But he looked good. I really wish they would have kind of utilized him a lot more. I mean, San Diego really fouled New England, or his game plan when they played us. They put Joe Revis was there, or Jason Verrett was there, J.O. Revis, and they put him on Golden Tate, who really is a shorter wide receiver, and they kind of have a similar body frame and everything, so it really matched up, and he was able to really lock down Golden Tate. And then Calvin was facing constant double teams, so I mean, Ebron had to have had at least a single opportunity or single coverage on every play, so I don't know why he wasn't really more of a factor, to be completely honest. If really looking for the open man, when I was watching, he was the open man a lot of the time. Either the pressure got there or Stafford made another read. It was confusing for me because I thought he would kind of be more involved, to be completely honest.
Before we turn our attention to Week 2 as the Lions are going to go and play the Vikings, let's look at a couple of the injuries that the Lions are dealing with this week. DeAndre Levy still dealing with a hip injury, and if you've ever listened to a Jim Caldwell press conference, you're not going to gain much information from those. He kept stressing, just check out the medical report for all these guys, so the medical report is what we're going off of. DeAndre Levy, hip injury. Haloti Ngata dealing with the shoulder. Brandon Pettigrew, hamstring. Golden Tate dealing with a quad, and They did not practice as of the most recent practice. We're talking here on Wednesday night, actually, this week, so a little bit more up to date than our usual Tuesday show. Karan Reed, Darius Slay, and Larry Warford were limited in practice. Stafford good to go, however. We'll see if he goes with the sleeve option once game time rolls around, but he is apparently good to go. So, Brandon, I'll toss to you really quick on these. Do you, other than Levy, which is obviously a major concern because we don't know when we're going to see him on the field, but between the others, are any of these real concerning to you?
Well, at least with the Golden Tate one, they're really going to have to. The Vikings do have Xavier Rhodes, so it's important to have all of their guys out there because Xavier Rhodes is an up-and-coming kind of lockdown guy. But Tate finished the game, and I think that was Josh Katz had seen. I saw responded to somebody on Twitter and pointed that out, was that he finished the game. He's going to be good to go. So I think, at least to me, that's the best news you can hear. But the other guys, we really have no way of knowing.
Yeah, that's just kind of how it goes with these injury reports from the Lions, guys. So again, we'll update you when we can on Facebook and Twitter and wherever else you guys want to get the information. And we'll see what happens going into Week 2 here against Minnesota, and that's what we're going to dive into now. Is Lions are going to play a Minnesota team that a lot of people expected to go into San Francisco and notch a W, but instead they looked just awful. Quite frankly, they lost 20-3 to San Francisco in the late Monday night game. If any of you were able to stick through the Chris Berman and Trent Dilfer broadcast, that might have been as bad as the game actually was. But Vikings looked terrible. Interesting game plan where Adrian Peterson wasn't really featured heavily, especially in the first half. I think he only had 4 carries. So you got two teams coming in off of losses here. Nick, just kind of looking at advantages for both teams, and there are advantages for both teams going into this game. But for the Lions, what do you think's their biggest advantage? And coming off of the Vikings looking really bad against those Niners.
It's got to be our defensive line versus their offensive line. I mean, I think our defensive line had like 20 pressures against San Diego, and they got the ball out quicker than anybody in the NFL. And we're playing against Minnesota, who held onto the ball longer than anybody else in the NFL. I mean, they've got a rookie, and then their interior people are a bunch of people most guys haven't even heard of, and they're going to be matched up against Tyron Walker, who's been throwing people all over the place, and Haloti Ngata, who actually had a pretty solid game last week and kind of just wasn't really a factor because he's getting double-teamed a lot, but he did a good job anchoring, made a couple good plays in the run game. But, I mean, I just really don't know who's going to block Tyron Walker, Ziggy Ansah, then on pass rushing looks. I mean, Philip Hunt can eat up TJ Clemens. I mean, he looked really good in the last game, and I don't, if they with Ian Philip against those tackles, I mean, one of them, Ziggy already destroyed Khalil and had like one of the record Pro Football Focus games against him. So, I mean, we know he can beat Khalil, and I think when Matt Khalil is your best offensive lineman.
Yeah, that's
so
actually.
I think that's going to be our biggest advantage, really.
And that's I agreed with you as well, Nick. I have Minnesota's offensive line being Detroit's biggest advantage. I'm not even going to necessarily say it's Detroit's defensive line, which obviously has a bit of a say in this argument, but that's how bad the offensive line looked, at least against San Francisco, especially. Last year, Vlad Ducati was trying to block Sue, and it never went well. I can see that exact scenario coming back, and they will wish that they had Vlad still on the team. So that's how bad that interior's been looking. I had to look it up, and I'm trying to find it again real quick. But Adrian Peterson had 3.1 yards per carry. He only saw 10 carries. It's very indicative of how well how poorly, I should say, that offensive line.
And most of them out of the shotgun as well. It wasn't the traditional Adrian Peterson getting carries out of the eye with a fullback in front of him. I guess Minnesota's they're dedicated to getting Teddy Bridgewater in the shotgun more this year, and they lived up to it in week 1 because Adrian Peterson getting counter runs out of the shotgun is just something I was not expecting to see, and Minnesota was dedicated to it when they did give Peterson the ball.
It sounds an awful. It's a very familiar story. Only the one I know involves somebody named Lombardi and outside zone runs, even if they don't work.
Well, then that's kind of outside of the advantage that both of you touched on. I'm kind of interested to see how Amir Abdullah and to a lesser extent Joique Bell look against a Vikings run D that was really bad against Carlos Hyde on Monday night, and Hyde, who didn't have a 100-yard game last year. gets the first one of his career against this Vikings run D. So I'm not sure if that was a fluke or if that's going to be the trend moving forward for the Vikings run D. But I'm really interested to see Abdullah, particularly against that run D, which I think is a step down from what San Diego even brought to the table a week ago.
Yeah, and I think you have a good point there as well, and it'll be interesting to see how that carries over, because Detroit did run the ball at least decently well at times. Obviously, as we talked about, Abdullah's 7-yard average. So you kind of hope that's going to have some carryover. Nick, I'm going to throw this one back to you, and Pursel, that is. The biggest advantage for Minnesota.
It's pretty much the same thing as what happened in the San Diego game. I think it's going to be their short area passing and screen game. Last year, Teddy Bridgewater was and in college really, is a pretty lethal short area passing and screen passer. So if they dial up a game plan similar to San Diego's and get the ball out of their hands quickly, I mean, we're going to struggle again unless we make some serious adjustments. We couldn't last week, so hopefully they've been working this week and they figure something out to where those short area passes aren't going to be able to beat us so easily. But I mean, I wish I knew how many yards we gave up on screens, because it had to have been a lot. I mean, they beat us with the same swing passes and screens the whole game, and we couldn't do anything to adjust. So if Minnesota can execute a game plan similar to that, I mean, unless we make a major adjustment, I don't see how it's going to end much differently.
Well, and Minnesota knows what's right for them. At least they're going to force Detroit to adjust to Adrian Peterson gashing them carry after carry. Again, we got into the Lions run D and Walker and Nada looking good, but Adrian Peterson is still Adrian Peterson. I don't know if they were hesitant to give him a ton of carries because he was just getting his feet wet coming back from a year off or whatnot, but you still have the best running back in football. So the Vikings should have an advantage no matter what defense they go against with Adrian Peterson, but it's not with shotgun counter run plays and shotgun draws. So this is predicated on the Vikings actually getting under center and giving Peterson the ball where he's supposed to between the tackles on inside runs. If it's out of the shotgun, that advantage is completely taken away. But Adrian Peterson is still Adrian Peterson, folks, and he's someone you have to watch out for in a very serious way. He should still be the anchor of this Vikings offense. I guess week 2, we'll find out if week 1 was a fluke type of offense or if that's just their game plan moving forward. But I'm going to go on the assumption that they're going to give Peterson the ball a lot in this game.
Well, he is somebody who's had kind of boom or bust qualities against Detroit traditionally lately. If you remember, I think it was the season opener 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. If you wiped out, obviously you can't wipe out a carry, but the one run for I think 80-something yards, he had 17 carries for 17 yards or something ridiculous. So Detroit has seen him. They know how to play him, but you're right. If they want to nullify that advantage by putting him in uncomfortable situations, I guess you have a young quarterback, and yes, you need to cater to him, but at the same time, what side is your bread buttered on here? You don't need Teddy Bridgewater to win so many games. It should just not lose them for now if you let Adrian Peterson do his thing. But again, that's all indicative of whether that offensive line can handle it. For me, the biggest advantage that Minnesota has is Xavier Rose, is Harrison Smith. These are a couple guys you could count on. I don't know if you remember if you watched that game Monday night, but Harrison Smith laid out Kaepernick. That was about the dumbest thing I've ever seen Kaepernick try to do, though, as well, which is saying a lot because I've watched a few of his games before, at least last year. But Xavier Rhodes, he's another guy that if you look at the numbers, and there was a really great article that I wasn't able to find just before this. Maybe I'll put it on social media, though I don't think any Lions fans will want to watch it, but how he is the guy that's ascending to that Richard Sherman, Darrelle Revis type level. And as Nick just broke down with Verrett shutting down Tate, it's something you have to be concerned about again. If they try to take away one of our better options, or one of Detroit's better options, is Detroit going to be able to adjust and do things that we just haven't seen them do?
Yeah, and we'll get into our predictions here in a second, whether which advantages are going to have more difference in this game. But first, we're going to do something we forgot to do it heading into Week 1, Brandon. Shame on us. Last year we did our bold predictions, and we always had our guest picker when they did come on join us for this as well. So, folks, we will track these throughout the season along with our predictions moving forward. Pursel, I'll toss this to you first. Just for this specific game, Brandon, we did do bold predictions for the season last week. We didn't do them for the specific games, which we were supposed to be doing.
Gotcha. I was confused.
Yeah. So, Pursel, for you, bold prediction for this game, something that's going to happen.
I think Calvin's going to rebound big. I think they've acted like they're not throwing it to him when he's double covered, but I mean, if that's our game plan and the team has someone who can shut down Golden Tate, you've officially taken out our two best wide receivers every game. So I think they're going to try and get Calvin the ball a lot more and kind of get away from their whole we're not throwing to him in double coverage. And actually, they had a couple chances to where Calvin was lined up in single coverage or had a favorable look, but a lot of the time they just decided to run it into a loaded box or run it right up the middle with Joik Bell, and that never worked. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to play some better situational football and really kind of find those opportunities to where they can get Calvin involved, put him in the slot and do stuff like that. And I think they're going to be more creative with him, and he's going to have a much better game. So I don't really know if that's bold, but coming off the first game, I guess it's a little bold.
I ended up writing, maybe that's why I was confused, to bold predictions, and I think it's something I'm doing every week now for Bleacher Report, but bold predictions for last week's game, and one of them I wrote was Calvin Johnson with 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, and I was told that wasn't bold enough. So good luck getting away with yours, Nick. But
yeah,
one
that's
thing
probably not going to work out.
One thing I did predict last week and get right was that Stafford would only suffer 1 sack. I just thought that would probably be a focus this offseason. And even, I mean, I probably would have stepped away from it had you given me the chance once I found out Waddle was indeed out. But, you know, these things work out, I guess, sometimes. And I think I'm going to stick with it again this week because Detroit can focus on this interior as far as running the ball and trying to keep pressure off of them. They are at least playing intelligently when it comes to that. Now, granted, they had some problems last week, and as we talked about, the pressured passes, it's not that Minnesota has terrible DNs there in Griffin and Robertson, but it's something that can be neutralized to an effect, especially if you're running the ball well. So I'm going to say that Stafford's only sacked 1 time this game.
Yeah, so keeping on the Stafford and kind of combining both of your guys' points on Calvin and Stafford, I think Stafford's going to have multiple interceptions in this game. And in this offense where they're trying to avoid turnovers at all costs, that I guess that's going to qualify. But it's because I think they are going to do what Nick said, and that's target Calvin Johnson a ton more. With double coverage or not, I think they're going to him in double digits targets at least in this game. And maybe that does result in multiple interceptions for Stafford because he does start forcing the ball to Calvin, as we've seen him do so many times over the course of his career. But for better or worse, after week 1 where he just did not try and get the ball to one of the best receivers in football, he's going to in bunches in week 2. I'm convinced of it. I think he throws multiple picks. But as we get into our predictions, I don't think it costs Detroit. I've got him winning this one 24-14. I think I was leaning towards Minnesota when I was looking at these matchups preseason. I thought this was going to be one where Detroit would slip up after going on the road in week 1, tough place in San Diego, and then having to play Minnesota. But after watching them against San Francisco, I need to see a lot more from Minnesota before I get back on that hype train. This was a team sleeper team for a lot of people, high upside, but they have a lot to show after a really poor week 1 performance. Pursel, for you on this one, what's your prediction?
I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be 20-17, and both the defenses are going to kind of look a little better. But in the end, Minnesota won't be able to work against our defensive line once the game gets coming down to it, and we can rush 4 because we're going to be able to rush 4 all game against them and drop a bunch of guys back in coverage. I don't think they're going to really be able to overpower us on offense. So I think the Lions are going to come away victorious, and it's going to be another kind of nail-biting loss where the Lions make some mistakes, but eventually got the win out and win it close going.
Well, it's interesting you bring up those predictions again, Nick. I figured you were Nick Kostor, that is. I figured you'd want to let those go this year, considering, as of course every other bet we have, I did win last year when it came to those. But as far as my prediction, I'm going Detroit 27-23, and the reasons are simple. As far as don't forget that this offense did put up, granted, I guess in the end it was technically only 21 points, and 7 did come against the pre-bet defense, but we did see the things that they can do. We did see some of the potential there. So I think maybe a week of seeing that film kind of, okay, this is what we do better than what we don't do, and hopefully I don't know why I have confidence in that message sinking in, because we haven't seen it happen too much over the past year. I think that it's going to help also as well with the healthy offensive line. At least Warford's practicing, albeit limited. There was no mention of Waddle in that injury report, if you didn't notice. So I think there's a lot there to feel better about, and they can expose that front seven, as we've already talked about. Folks, a couple things we want to throw out there for you. Nick Pursel, of course, thank you for joining us. The Twitter is Nick_Pursel. That's Pursel, writer for SideLionReport.com. Folks, we also are putting out our picks against the spread every week, just a little something to throw out for the website. We didn't talk about it last week, but of course I'm leading Nick 10-7. We'd love to hear your picks, your thoughts, or any concerns you have about the Detroit Lions. You can find us on Facebook, Lions Central Radio. You can find the show on Twitter, Lions Central PFC. You can find me on Twitter at Brandon Alisoglu. That's ALISOGLU. You can find Nick Kostora at Nick Kostora, KOSTORA.
I want to have a witty retort, but I haven't won any of these bets yet, so it's hard for me to have any ground to stand on. So I'll wait until I do. Hopefully I do. Until then, I'll be quiet on those fronts. For Nick Pursel, we, of course, appreciate him joining us. Hope to have him on again soon. For Brandon Alisoglu, I am Nick Kostora. Thank you so much for joining us on Lions Central Radio.